Okay, in this third video, we're going to look at the for loop where we're going to iterate through, but we don't have a list. So the question is, how can we do that? How can we have a for loop if we don't have a list to go through? Because a list is fantastic. You go through every single item in the list and it stops when you get to the last element in our list. Well, sometimes it's not always possible to have a list and it doesn't make sense for a program. But that doesn't mean we can't still use the for loop. So this is where we're going to use the function range. So this is where it's going to be very helpful. So let me show you how we're going to set it up and then we're going to talk through it. So let's say we're going to have for, and we can call it whatever we want. We can call it X, number. It really doesn't really matter. I'm going to actually just call it temporary variable X in this case because it's not defined by a specific list. So we're just talking about iterating through as often as we want. So let's say for X, in range, well, range 5, let's say. Well, what does that mean, right? So if I just want to, and I don't want to forget my colon, let's say I print X. Let's see what that looks like. What does this mean? What's happening? So I'm going to run this program and take a look. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's starting at 0. So our default with our range functions, we're starting at 0. Your default is also to go up by increments of 1. And then you're going to stop just before you get to 5. So we're going to stop at 4. So we have iterations going through 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we want something to happen 5 times. Okay. Now, this is not a lesson about range. The range function we can talk in more detail, and it has been brought up in a different lesson where we do talk about where we can change our argument so that we can have, let's say, well, we want to start at a certain number, end at a certain number, and then increase by a certain step. But that doesn't really pertain to this situation. Because of for loop, we want to just basically utilize the range to help decide how many times do we want something to happen, and we don't have a list to go by. Awesome. So let's go to what the instructions are in this particular program. We're going to create a for loop that goes through 5 times. We've done that with the range 5. Awesome. We're going to use a count variable to keep track of iterations. And then we're going to change the order of when the count increases to see the change in the output. So one thing at a time. So first things first, outside the loop, let's create a variable called count. And let's have the default of the count being 0. And then down in here, instead of having print X, I'm going to print count. All right, so let's run this before I do anything else and see what happens and how this differs from what we just saw. So we're going to run. Oh, all right. So we have 5 iterations of 0. So we have 0, 0, 0, 0, because all we've done is print. So we printed the count value, but we're not printing X this time. We're not printing how many times we're going through something. We are going to go print count and print that variable 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Well, that means we need to make some changes because we're going to increase that value for count. And in a previous video, we talked about how we can do that. And if we want to increase, let's say, by 1, and using a count is awesome. So for games or any other scenarios, count just really helps us support going through something where even if we get to, or when we get to the while loop, a count or a counter, something like that could really help us define how long we stay within a loop. Okay, in this particular case, though, all we're doing is taking a variable called count, and we're going to increase it by 1. All right. So notice though, in terms of where I have the print. So I'm printing count, then increasing by 1. So let's see what that output looks like. So it still starts at 0, of course, because my count value coming into my loop, it's 0. Then it increases by 1. Then it goes through and then now prints as 1. So you can see how it's increasing after the print statement, which is why we're going from 0 to 4. But let's take this and rearrange it. What if I increase the count first and then I did the print? So the order in Python, very important. So let's take a look. This time our print term, our very first one, is not 0, it's 1, because we increase from 0 to 1 before we print it. And then it goes through and through and through. So keep those kind of things in mind when you're creating your bigger projects as to how you may want to use something like this. So your big takeaway here is the range, which can tell you how often you're going to go through something, how often you want it to happen without needing a list. And then you're going to go through whatever is underneath in my for loop over and over again until we've hit that maximum number of iterations. All right, so I hope that helps creating for loops and using the range function.